The bulletin says 7:35, which is great. And we begin in the Lav Shalom Siddur. Again, thank you to Norm Carr for having organized these page calling sheets. On page 214, the Slim Shalom 1999 Siddur on page 226, the Sim Shalom Older Siddur edition, either the small or the large one, page 558. We begin with Ashrei. Ashrei Yoshevi Veitecha, Hojalilu Chasela, Ashrei Ham Shekacha Lo, Ashrei Ham Shadonai Eloha, Teilah LeDavid. Tehillat Adonai Yidber pi, Vivarech kol basar shem kodsho leolam va'ed, V'anachnu nivarech Yah, Me'atav yad olam hallelujah. We're on 216, 227, or 560. Uva letzion goel shavei fasha b'Yaakov nehum Adonai. V'yata kadosh yoshev tilav Yisrael, v'karazel ze v'yamar, kadosh 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 Adonai tzevahot melo chol haaretz kevodo. V'tisaini ruach v'shma charai kol rash gadol, baruch kevod Adonai mimekomo. Adonai himloch leolam va'ed. V'yiftechu b'cha yudei shemecha, ki lo azavta doreshecha Adonai, Adonai chafetz leman tziko, yagdil Torah v'yadir. If we were here all together in person, as was really remarkable as a change of pace this morning to be here on site on the field, we would be pulling a Torah out of the ark and doing a little Torah service for the afternoon. But because we're joining and anchored in this service, I'm here in the sanctuary and you are wherever you are, we will study Parshat Shoftim, and I'll chant for us the first Aliyah from that Parsha. If you're reading from any kind of a Hebrew Bible, we are in the 16th chapter, beginning with verse 18. If you're following along in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, that begins on page 1088. This is a really fascinating Torah portion for all sorts of reasons. Because there still is not so much time for us to study together, I'll give you a little bit of a heads up in case you want your eyes to glance forward. There are all sorts of injunctions and instructions found here, legal ones, and mostly the first part of the Parsha is concerned with the appointment of legal officials, magistrates and judges, and who's going to make rulings in matters of justice. In fact, verse 20 contains within it the famous instruction, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. And eventually, just past where I'm going to chant. So if you get bored with my chanting and instead want to go ahead a little further in the Torah study, I give you permission for your eyes to leap ahead to page 1092 to where we will begin next Saturday morning on the second full Kriya Aliyah, or whatever we're reading in the triennial cycle, with Ki Tavo El Haaretz, the instruction about when we've entered the land. Once we've entered the land, we are supposed to have set before us a king, and that king has instructions given to them. What are they supposed to do? And one of the instructions given to that king is that they're supposed to have a copy of the Torah with them. What does that mean? That's what we're going to study. So I invite you to turn to that verse, to verse 14 in the 17th chapter, if you want to look ahead a little bit, or you can follow along with me. I'm starting on page 1088. First, a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to study words of Torah. Shovitim v'shoterim, titan lecha v'chol she'arecha, asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha lishvatecha, v'shavtu et ha'am mishpat tzedek, lo tatei mishpat, lo takir panim, v'lo tikach shochad ki hashochad, yaver hinei chachamim, v'salev divrei tzadikim, tzedek tzedek tirdov, למען תחיה וירשת את הארץ אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך לא תיטע לך אשרה כל עצי צל מזבח אדוני אלוהיך אשר תעשה לך לא תקים לך מצבה אשר שדה אדוני אלוהיך לא תזבח לאדוני אלוהיך שור ועשה אשר יהיה בו מום כל דבר כי תועבת אדוני אלוהיך הוא ימצא בקרבך באחד שעריך אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך איש או אישה אשר יעשה את הרע בעיני אדוני אלוהיך לעבור בריתו וילך ויעבוד אלוהים אחרים וישחו להם ולשמש לירח לכל צבא השמיים אשר לא ציוויתי והוגד לך ושמעת ודרשת היטב והנה אמת נכון הדבר נעשתה התועבה הזאת בישראל והוצאת את האיש ההוא את האישה ההיא אשר עשו את הדבר הרע הזה את שריך את האיש או את האישה ושכלתם באבנים ומתו על פי שניים עדים או שלוש עדים יומת המת לא יומת על פי עד אחד יד העדים דיו בו בראשונה למיתו ויד כל העם באחרונה וביארת הרע מקרבך כי יפלה ממך דבר למשפט בין דם לדם בין דין לדין ובין נגע לנגע דברי ריבות בשעריך וקמת ועלית אל המקום אשר יבחר אדוני אלוהיך בו ובאת אל הכהנים הלוויים ואל השופט אשר יהיה בימים ההם ודרשת והגידו לך את דבר המשפט ועשית על פי הדבר אשר יגידו לך מן המקום ההוא אשר יבחר אדוני ושמרת לעשות ככל אשר יורוך על פי התורה אשר יורוך על משפט אשר יאמרו לך תעשה לא תסור מן הדבר אשר יגידו לך ימין ושמאל והאיש אשר יעשה בזדון בלתי שמוע אל הכהן העומד לשרת שם את אדוני אלוהיך או אל השופט ומת האיש ההוא ויראת רע מישראל וכל העם ישמעו ויראו ולא יזידון עוד. So if you keep reading, the next paragraph, beginning with verse 14, you get into the place, if you've entered the land of the Lord, your God has assigned to you and taken your possession of it and settled it. And then you decide, I'm going to set a king over me, right, as a people, because that's what nations do. Then you can do that. You can set a king over yourself, but there are rules about who you can set, and there are rules about what that person can do and what they must do, including having a copy of the Torah with them at all times. We'll get into that a little more in a little bit. Before I move on to the Amidah, just checking one more time, was there anybody who had a male that they were hoping to say in honor of a loved one, anniversary of the death of a loved one this week? Okay, without any males to be recited specifically, we're going to move on to the Mincha Amidah. I invite you to turn to page 223 in the Lev Shalem, 234 A or B in Slim Shalom, 574 in Sim Shalom for your whispered private Amidah to be recited individually.
another one person?
Yeah, 1 second. Rabbi Charney, Hannah has just come in, but I think we're down one person. If Marlies wants to recite Kaddish, if you want to have a minion for that.
Well, I think we're okay on Minion because of who else is in the households with us. So I think we've got the count.
David just came in. Okay, fine.
Okay.
Yep, I think we're just now good.
Good.
Yeah. But thank you. I'm glad Hannah's there to help make Minion. Thank you. And good to see you. I'm on page 230 in Lev Shalem. We're just at the close of the Amidah. Please continue at your own pace for the whispered Amidah if you are in the midst of your own private Amidah. צדקתך צדק לעולם, בתורתך אמת, וצדקתך אלוהים עד מרום, אשר עשית גדולות אלוהים מי כמוך, צדקתך כהר הלל, משפטיך תהום רבה, אדם ובהמה תושיע אדוני. Aleinu is on page 231, 248, 598. Aleinu לשבח לאדון הכל, להעתק גדולה ליוצא בראשית. הכתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יחיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. So take your time getting there, but Mourner's Kaddish is at page 232, 249, or page 600. Marlies, did you want to lead us in it? You'd prefer not, sorry, yes or no? You prefer not to lead us in it? Okay, so let's have Alan lead us in Kaddish, but even Alan, as if that's okay, if you could unmute yourself to lead us. Yeah, okay, great. So go ahead and unmute yourself so you can lead us. Even so, Marlies, if I could just say a word to you that there is a strange and beautiful thing that happens in this moment right now, which is that typically speaking, we ask that as all of Shiva limitations are suspended on Shabbat, people rejoin the community just for kind of a moment in order to come to synagogue on Shabbat, right? There's this strange leaving of the bubble of Shiva. If they have a torn garment or they wear the ribbon, they remove that ribbon and they join us for Shabbat and they come into the midst of the synagogue and there's a sort of dance of being a part of us and then sort of go back to the bubble of Shiva. But because of the situation that we're in right now, there's a way for you to be both in your home, still in the midst of Shiva, having just buried your mother yesterday, and also to be with us as community. So as you are there and reciting Kaddish, know that you are both with us in community, outside of that bubble of Shiva, still in the embrace of Shabbat, and we are with you in that sort of taste still of the existence of Shiva there, knowing that that's what's returning after Shabbat. We see you, we are with you, and we hear you even as we don't hear you. So we see you there. And Alan, if you're ready to lead us, I'll be your amen.
Yikadal v'yikada shemei rabbah.
Amen.
V'alma divrach yirteh v'yamich malchuteh. V'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chayet techol Beit Yisrael. V'agala v'zman kari v'yemru. Amen.
Amen.
Yehei shmei rei rabba ravarach le'olmo me'almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yirmam v'yanaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kodesha brichu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nachamata, da'amiram be'alma v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shlam rabba min shemaya, v'chaim elenu be'akol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom beramav, hu yaseh shalom elenu be'akol Yisrael v'yimru. Amen.
Amen. So get comfortable for a minute. Yishar koach. Thank you for leading us, Alan. And it's good to see everybody's faces so I can see. Welcome if you're joining us on YouTube. If you had an opportunity to print out the learning sheet that I sent, then you're welcome to pull it up right now. I'll share with you again that the source within the course of this coming week's Parsha, Parshat Shoftim, can be found in the Eitz Chaim Chumash on page 1092. If you're looking in any Hebrew Bible, we're in Deuteronomy and Devarim, the 17th chapter, and we're going to be looking at verse 18 particularly. And we only have a few minutes to study this together, really. We're just going to look at it for a few minutes. I want us to come to an understanding about what it means to have a copy of the Torah for a king. This doesn't seem so absurd, and I'll just start from the place of saying that we know, even to this day, that it actually is a sign of grandeur for some people, particularly people of means and wealth in certain communities, particularly for people of power in certain communities, to have a copy of a Torah, right? You all know somebody in our community or someone in a community that you've lived in who's had a copy of a Torah scroll, right? And I think that that's actually an analog to what we're talking about here, because this isn't a time in which someone could have just printed an Eitz Chaim Chumash. That would have been quite the scribal undertaking to actually have a copy of a Torah scroll. So I think that the analog exists, and we can imagine what it means for somebody to have a copy of the Torah. The question, though, and the question for certain for the two commentators who we're going to look at, really three, because Rashi's drawing on a rabbinic conversation in Talmud and Sanhedrin, which I brought on the page here, and then this other commentary by the Ketav Sofer. Their conversation is why. Because the Torah thinks it's very important, meaning the Torah text itself thinks it's very important that if we should have a king appointed over us, that the king has a copy of the Torah. So in order to know why, we have to know what it means that a king has a copy of a Torah scroll. And there's a debate as to what it means. And actually the debate is between Rashi, or Rashi as he brings the Sanhedrin, and Onkelos. And Onkelos, as a translator into the Aramaic, kind of takes the basic, clear, plain pshat meaning. And Rashi takes a different take. So let's look at the verse first. V'haya cheshivto al kisei mamlachto. When he's seated on his royal throne, plain meaning. Let's not go too literal. Plain, not literal meaning. V'chatav lo et mishnei haTorah hazot. They should write for it. It should be written for him. They should write for him a copy, a Mishnah Torah, probably a familiar phrase, title of a bunch of books. Al hasefer. Milifnei hakohanim haleviim. It should be done before him by this class of the priests. Okay, so what does Rashi say here? Et mishnei haTorah, a Mishnah Torah. That is to say, Rashi immediately goes to, oh, they're talking about two scrolls of the Torah. Okay, they're talking about he should have two copies of it. Hang on, skip to the end of the commentary. Right? Skip to the end where it says Onkelos, however, because you probably would have thought this at first. You probably would have thought along the lines of what Onkelos said. Now, Onkelos says the following. When Onkelos translates this to Aramaic, we get, however, he renders Mishneh by pot shegen. Where do we know the word pot shegen from? I bet you know this word. I bet Marshall Kramer knows this word. Where is that from? You can even unmute and tell us. Let's see.
Okay, well, it's from the Megillah itself.
Great. And what does it mean in the Megillah? Do you remember?
That I don't remember. No.
So it's actually the source in the Megillah of our doing that weird thing you see on Purim where we fold the scroll funny. Uh-huh. You know, up on the bima, you might have noticed that folks who read from the Megillah scroll do this funky folding situation because of this idea that it was this pot shegen. It was kind of this pamphlet that was sent out to the people. And in a meta sense, we're representing that this pot shegen was sent out. This letter, this edict kind of was sent out, right? Like this copy was written. But you're 100% right. That's exactly where we know this word from, this pot shegen. And so Onkelos says he was supposed to have a copy of pot shegen, exactly. So he interpreted the word Mishnah in the sense of basically a repetition and an uttering, right? So a Mishnah Torah, he's supposed to have a copy, a repetition of the Torah with him. Back up though. Rashi thinks it's something different. He's supposed to have 2 scrolls with him. And I brought you the Sanhedrin, but we're not going to go deeply into it. I just wanted you to see the original, the OG Sanhedrin. It's right beneath it too, in case you want to go into it. But look at Rashi's summary of it. 2 scrolls of the law, one that's placed in his Beit Genazav, in his, sounds like a Geniza, right? Because that's what it means. Same thing. It's placed in his treasury. And the other that goes out and comes in with him. Okay? In this nice summary, it says, like a travel-sized one. Does that make sense? Right? I mean, it kind of does. I like it. I like that read of it too. And I think they read it for 2 reasons. I get that the Sanhedrin read of it for 2 reasons. I think they read it literally because Mishneh means a duplication, right? So not just a teaching, but it could mean a duplication. And also I think v'haya cheshivto. And it should be that when he's seated on his throne, he should have a copy, which should mean when he's not seated on his throne, he should also have a copy. I would think. That's very rabbinic, right? I think that's what they're saying in this argumentation. Okay, so I want to look at this Hungarian commentary, which really moves me. It's the last source that I brought on the page. It comes from my teacher, Rabbi Daniel Goldfarb, whom I love and miss, and who was one of my first teachers at the conservative yeshiva when he was teaching there in 2007, when I first studied there, which now feels like, I guess this is my bat mitzvah year away from there. It was an amazing experience learning from him. And he has this little vort where he teaches all of that background on this particular piece of Torah. And then he teaches the Katav Sofer. So he says, Binyamin Shriver, who is the Katav Sofer, was the Katav Sofer, is a 19th century, mid-19th century Hungarian commentator. He says every king or leader rabbi should have 2 Sifrei Torah. Okay, he agrees with this Sanhedrin Rashi take on it. And he says he should have one that's for home, for himself, in which he should observe every mitzvah with very strict precision. So when he's sitting on his throne, he should observe it, bishirut, and also very midakdik, very carefully. And the other one he should take with him when he goes out on the road to the people, with which he should be lifnim mishurat hadin. He should show more latitude, and he should teach them more according to the spirit of the law.
Why should the king have one?
Why should what?
The king. Why should the king have one, 2 Sefer Torahs? Why? I mean, is he a secular king or a religious king?
No, this is the king. This is the king of the Israelites they've appointed. They have appointed a king.
Okay.
They've appointed a king, and now they've appointed a king, and the king should have these 2 Sifrei Torah with him. And he should have a Sefer Torah with him on his throne, and he should have a Sefer Torah when he goes to the people.
Okay.
And when he goes out to the people, this is the Torah for himself, and this is the Torah and this is the Torah for the people. And so the way that he's reading it is to say, it's not about him literally having 2 separate Sifrei Torah written. He's saying, when you go to read the rule book, and you're the king, and you're the one with power, and you're the one with influence, and you're the one who gets to have the final say. You're the one who has to treat this Torah with the ultimate care, and you got to be strict with yourself.
Right.
But when you go out there and you bring the Torah to the people, you should know that they're out there and they're living beyond the throne room. And that in the context of the Torah, where we are in the Torah right now, in the context of all of the rules that the king is being given about how he should care for the people, who you should choose, what kind of character he ought to have, what he should go out there and rule as, the Katav Sofer says, listen, he should go and he should approach the people, and he should approach them with latitude and with stretchiness, and understand that he should give some give when it comes to offering Torah out to the people. With himself, he should be careful. All right, I'm going to give Gary a word before I close this because he looks very excited. Gary.
Very exciting. The quick question, it says a copy of the Torah. So this is the kosher Torah? Because a copy could have been, it doesn't have to be, if it has one error, it can't be a kosher Torah. I just didn't know, clearly the words were there, but was it halakhically the scribe would do everything perfect, or didn't make that much, wasn't that crucial?
Right. So I think that Onkelos thinks maybe. And I think that Rashi thinks definitely. And I think the Ketav Sofer, in answer to your question, and I think the Ketav Sofer says, we're not talking about scrolls. Okay? You hear what I'm saying? Right?
Yeah.
Like Rashi and Onkelos, remember Rashi's 11th century. Onkelos, I didn't write it down. Anybody know off the top of your head? A lot longer ago. But I'm not fast enough on my feet. But the Ketav Sofer in the 19th century, he says, we're not talking about scrolls, right? We're talking about when you look at the Torah and you give Torah, not a Torah, but give Torah, when you're dealing the Torah to the people, right? He says, that's what it means. You should have a copy of the Torah, right? 2 Torahs. He says, this is a drash. You should understand that you should be kinder and with give more latitude when it comes to reading the Torah out to the people. But with yourself, you
Is the
should take tremendous care.
strict interpretation of Deuteronomy 17:18, does it actually say 2 scrolls? Does that term et mishneh mean 2 scrolls in Hebrew, or is it 1 scroll? See, I think the last one you read from the 19th century makes more sense, except because it really doesn't really say 2 scrolls. It just says 1 scroll. It's 2 uses.
I think at Mishneh HaTorah, I think it literally means a copy of the Torah. He should have a copy of it. He should have
Right.
It might even mean, it might and even likely meant, I don't know, I can't say for sure, a reciter, like to accompany him from among the priests who could recite the Torah constantly, because the oral tradition was so strong in that time. That could have been the case. I don't know. I'm not a scholar to know for certain what the true and likely pshat would have been.
Well, the 19th century guy makes more sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
I like what he has to say. And I think it's a great teaching for us in our time, which is to say that if there is a rule book that we are living by and we are in a position of power, and maybe I'll leave you with this so that we can dive in a little Mari before we close. If there is a rule book by which we are trying to live, whether it is a Torah or whether it's some sort of a personnel handbook, and we're in the position to be that powerful person, and there is someone else who is the person we're in the position to supervise, for example, right? That when we're the person in the position of power to wield that book, right? We are closest to that source, that there is tremendous wisdom in asking ourselves to hold ourselves more strictly to those rules and to give the people over whom we have oversight even more latitude, that we hold ourselves to high standards, to be exemplars, to hold ourselves close to that source, and that as we have power to wield that book and all the rules and the consequences within it, that we offer latitude out to the people over whom we might execute some power. So I'll leave us with that thought, and we'll turn to some Mariv. Mariv begins on page, I better not cover up my page numbers. Oh, we could talk about that for a lot longer. Next week we'll start much earlier, I hope. Okay, so we began on page 264 in Lev Shalom, 281 in Slim Shalom, 200 in Sim Shalom. I have the wrong book in front of me, so give me a second. Here we go. We begin with V'hurachum, skipping the Baruch Hu and moving to the first paragraph of blessing before the Shema. V'hurachum yichaber bo melo yashchid v'irba v'shiva po v'lo yir kol chamad to Adonai Hoshea melech yaneinu v'yom koreinu Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bivaro mariv arevim bo ma potech shavim. Humavir yom mevi laila mavdil bin yom huvin laila Adonai tzvot shemo hilchai v'chayam tamid yimloch aleinu leolam vahid Baruch atah Adonai hamariv aravim. V'ahavatecha al tasir mimenu leolamim Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael el melech ne'eman Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzitechem me'eretz Yisrael liyirav lachem Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem emet v'emuna kol zavim. U'malchut b'ratzon kibelu lehem Moshe u'vnei Yisrael lechanu shira v'simcha harav yamiru chulam mi chamocha bailim Adonai mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh nora tehilot asifele malchutecha ra'uvanecha v'okeyam livnei Moshe ze'lianu v'hamiru Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed v'nemar kifad Adonai Jacob U'yalom yad chazak mimenu baruch atah Adonai kahal Yisrael. Run 267, 284, 206. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom. Amideinu malkeinu l'chaim. Fros alinu sukat shalamecha. Ushmar tziteinu voinu l'chaim u'shalom yetah v'yarolam baruch atah Adonai shomer hamo Yisrael ad baruch Adonai le'olam amen v'amen. Baruch Adonai. Ki malchut shelecha hi u'lo me'adim loch v'chavod ki in lanu melech ala tabaruch atah Adonai hamelech b'chodo tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'hed v'al kol ma'asav. The whispered private Amidah for the end of Shabbat begins on 270 in Lev Shalem, 286 A or B in Slim Shalom, 210 in Sim Shalom. Don't forget, if you're in a Siddur, we're using the usual evening Mariv to please include in the first paragraph of the Bakashot, the middle blessings, the inclusions for the end of Shabbat. You're just finishing your own private Amidah. Please continue at your own pace. We're on 279, in the middle of the page. If you're in Lev Shalem, we are on 292 in Slim Shalom, 682 in Sim Shalom. V'hinom Adonai Eloheinu aleinu ma'aseh yadeinu konena aleinu ma'aseh yadeinu konenehu yoshev Yiseiter Elyon b'tzel Shaddai. Yikrein hivenehu imo anochi v'tzara achaletzehu v'achbadehu orech yamim masbiehu v'arehu b'shuati orech yamim masbiehu v'arehu b'shuati. Turn back to page 216 if you're in Lev Shalem. All the other Sidurim, we continue forward. Second paragraph on the page in Lev Shalem. V'eta kadosh Hashem tilot Yisrael v'kara zel ze v'hamar kadosh 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 Adonai tzvot melech la'aretz kivoto. ותישאני רוח ושמע אחרי כל רעש גדול, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ויפתחו בך יודעי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה וידיר. Turn back to Aleinu 281, 297, 696. Aleinu lishabeach ladon hakol, latei gedulat yitzei shishim. Kakatu v'toratech Adonai himloch le'olam v'hevene hemar v'haya Adonai v'melech kol haaretz b'yom hu Adonai echad u'shmo echad. Alan, I think we'll have you unmute again to lead us in Mourner's Kaddish on page 282, 298, 698.
Yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divrach li'irteh, v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chaychon v'yamechon, v'chayed v'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agalav izman kariv v'yamru. Amen.
Amen.
Yehi shmei rabbah mavrach le'olam olamei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yirman v'yanaseh, Yitadar v'yitela v'yitela shmei dekudisha b'richu.
Brichu.
Leila mikol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata da'amira be'alma v'yamru. Amen.
Amen.
Yehi shalom rabbi min shemaya, v'chaim alenu v'akol Yisrael v'yamru. Amen.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'ramav, hu yoseh shalom alenu v'akol Yisrael v'yamru. Amen.
Amen. Sharkoach. You don't know Rachel Cohen yet and haven't met her yet, I want to point out that we are joined now by one of our rabbinic interns, our newer rabbinic intern, Rachel. You may see her face in upcoming, I keep wanting to say Sudash Lishit learning, but that's just not the case unless you decide to eat on your own. But afternoon learning session. So welcome, Rachel. I'm glad you're here. We're going to do Havdalah now. I'm not going to spell this week. I'm not. A couple of reminders that after this, you can join Zoom out of Shabbat or Zoom into Havdalah, whatever the heck we call it. And then tomorrow, don't forget, if you signed up for a slot to come pick up a machzor and drive through the synagogue parking lot to do that, please do that. And as we announced this morning, in case you were not at some sort of public prayers, this Wednesday evening begins the month of Elul and also through Friday. And then, the whole month of Elul. There we go. Hinei el Yeshuati yiftach v'lo evchan ki oziv zimunat Adonai v'yihi li Yeshua u'shavtem me'im b'sason mimanei Yeshua l'Adonai Yeshua l'macha v'irchatecha salah Adonai tzvot imanu miskavlanu Elohei Yaakov salah Adonai tzvot asher ata boteach bach Adonai Hoshea Melech Yaneinu, B'yom Korenu. Leyehudim hayitara, v'simcha v'sason v'kar, kein tihye lanu. Kos yeshuot esav, v'shem Adonai ekra, savri. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei minei besamim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei morei ha'eish. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, ben hor lechoshech ben Yisrael ha'amim, ben yom ha'shvi'i l'sheshet yemei ha'maseh. Baruch atah Adonai, hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Shavua tov, 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 Shavua tov. I wish everybody a week of blessings, a week of peace, a week of good health. As always, we encourage you to come and join in all of our extended learning opportunities throughout the coming weeks. Henry Morgan's shofar class on Mondays is amazing. I highly recommend that you join, as does the Chavar Kadisha class, and continue to be a great course. And you know, come to Henry's class for the kudu jokes and the continued learning there. And Wednesday nights, we're navigating the Machzor. So come join 7:30 p.m. for that. And 1,000 classes in between. Last week, there was this amazing one with Rabbi Abby Stein, a trans female rabbi who comes out of the Hasidic world. Just don't miss them. They're really good. So come join us, and Shavua Tov, and I'll see y'all soon. And thanks, Kenji.